Imagine being ripped from your mother's arms at age 8. You don't speak the language of the men taking you. You don't understand where you're going. All you know is that your world, your village, your faith, your name is being erased. And by the time you become a man, you won't just accept that erasure. You'll embrace it. You'll kill for it. You'll die for it. This is not fiction. This happened to hundreds of thousands of boys across the Balkans, Anatolia, and the Caucasus for over 3 centuries. And the warriors it produced were, by almost every measure, the most effective military force the medieval and early modern world had ever seen. They were called the Janissaries. And their story is one of the most disturbing, fascinating, and tragically human tales in all of history. Let's begin at the very beginning. Not with a battle, not with a conquest, but with a knock on a door. Somewhere in the mountains of Serbia, or the valleys of Greece, or the plains of Bulgaria, an Ottoman tax collector arrived. He was not there for grain or gold. He was there for something far more valuable and far more devastating. Boys. Healthy, intelligent, strong boys between the ages of 8 and 18. This practice was called the devshirme, a word that translates simply as collection, though everything about it was anything but simple. Once every few years, Ottoman officials would sweep through Christian-majority territories and identify the most promising male children. Their families had no real right of refusal. To resist was to invite punishment. To comply was to lose your child forever. What makes this system so psychologically complex is that it was simultaneously one of the most brutal and one of the most pragmatic institutions in history. The boys were not enslaved in the traditional sense. They were not sent to mines or fields. They were sent to palaces. They were educated. They were trained. They were fed better than most free men of their era. And the very best among them could, and often did, rise to become governors, generals, and grand viziers, effectively the second most powerful men in the empire. Some historians have pointed out, with no small amount of discomfort, that many families eventually began bribing Ottoman officials to take their sons because the devshirme represented one of the only genuine meritocratic ladders that existed in the medieval world. But let's not romanticize what was, at its core, a system of forced separation and total identity replacement. Because the process that followed the collection was not education in any warm sense of the word. It was transformation through control trauma. Once collected, the boys were converted to Islam. This was non-negotiable. Their Christian names were stripped away. Their cultural identities were severed with surgical precision. They were placed in Turkish households for years, forced to learn Ottoman Turkish, Islamic theology, and the customs of a civilization that was not their own. This phase was called Asami Oğlan, roughly novice boys, and it could last anywhere from 2 to 7 years. By the end of it, the boy who had been born in a Serbian village was, in every way that mattered, gone. What remained was something new, something forged, something entirely loyal to the Ottoman state. Then came the real training. The Janissary Corps, known in Ottoman Turkish as the Janissary, new soldiers, trained in institutions called the devshirme schools, and later in the barracks that would become their permanent homes. The curriculum was extraordinary by medieval standards. They learned archery, swordsmanship, wrestling, horsemanship, and eventually the use of firearms. They drilled in formation. They practiced discipline so relentlessly that contemporaneous European observers wrote home with genuine alarm, describing these soldiers as unlike anything they had encountered. One Venetian diplomat watching a Janissary unit perform maneuvers wrote that they moved as if possessed of a single mind. That wasn't an accident. That was the point. Their physical conditioning was brutal even by the standards of professional soldiery. They ran. They carried heavy loads. They were subjected to periods of deliberate food restriction to teach their bodies to function under deprivation. They trained in heat and cold. And all of this was wrapped in a deeply religious framework. Janissary units were organized around Sufi brotherhoods, specifically the Bektashi order, which gave the Corps a near-mystical sense of identity and brotherhood. They didn't just train together. They prayed together, ate together, slept in the same barracks, and were forbidden from marrying or holding property during the early centuries of the institution. Their only family was the core. Their only home was the empire. Their only father was the sultan. Can you imagine what that does to a person? To belong to nothing and no one except an institution that has total claim over your body and your death? It created something genuinely terrifying on the battlefield. Janissaries in their prime were arguably the most formidable infantry force in the world. At the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, they played a decisive role in one of the most famous engagements of the medieval Balkans. At the Siege of Constantinople in 1453, it was the Janissaries who finally breached the Theodosian walls after a 7-week siege, walls that had held for over 1,000 years. Mehmed II, the Sultan who oversaw that conquest, was only 21 years old, but he understood what his Janissaries were. He understood that they were not merely soldiers. They were a statement. They were proof that the Ottoman Empire had built something that no other power on earth had yet figured out. A professional standing army loyal to no clan, no family, no tradition, only to the state itself. This was revolutionary. In an era when European armies were still largely composed of feudal levies, peasants dragged from their fields by local lords with competing loyalties, the Ottomans had a force of career professionals who had been systematically trained since childhood. The advantages were immense. Janissaries knew how to hold a formation under fire. They knew how to operate artillery, and they were among the earliest adopters of firearms in the Islamic world. At the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, a Janissary line equipped with muskets helped destroy the Hungarian army in under 2 hours. Suleiman the Magnificent stood at the edge of that battlefield and reportedly wept, not from grief, but because the victory had been so complete, so swift, that there was almost nothing left to feel triumphant about. Their lifestyle reflected their unique status in Ottoman society. In the early centuries, Janissaries were forbidden from growing beards, a visual marker that set them apart from free Muslim men, for whom a beard carried deep religious significance. They were forbidden from engaging in trade or acquiring wealth. They were forbidden from marrying. These restrictions were not punishments. They were engineering. By eliminating the competing loyalties of family and fortune, the Ottoman state ensured that a Janissary's entire emotional and psychological world revolved around his unit. His brothers in arms were his brothers in every sense that counted. Their headgear, the tall, distinctive white felt hat called the bork, was not merely decorative. It carried enormous symbolic weight. The front of the hat featured a wooden spoon holder, a reference to the communal cooking pot that was the central symbol of Janissary life. In the barracks, the soup cauldron wasn't just for feeding men. It was sacred. When a Janissary unit accepted a new sultan, they symbolically received food from his kitchen. When they wanted to signal rebellion, they overturned the soup cauldrons, one of the most dramatic gestures of defiance available to them. More on that in a moment, because here is where the story starts to bend and eventually to break. The same qualities that made the Janissaries extraordinary soldiers also made them extraordinarily dangerous to the sultans they served. A corps of highly trained, psychologically bonded, deeply disciplined men with no external loyalties has exactly one loyalty: to the institution itself. And institutions, given enough time and power, begin to develop their own interests. By the 16th and 17th centuries, the Janissaries had begun to drift away from the ascetic, selfless warrior ideal that had defined them in their early centuries. They were permitted to marry. They were permitted to enroll their own sons in the corps, bypassing the devshirme entirely. They began to engage in trade. They acquired property. They accumulated wealth. And with wealth came political power. And with political power came something the Ottoman state had never intended to create: a permanent, entrenched military aristocracy with veto power over the throne itself. Sultans began to fear their own Janissaries, not in the abstract way that powerful rulers fear powerful armies, but in the immediate, visceral way that a man fears the heavily armed people standing directly behind him. Between the late 16th and early 19th centuries, the Janissaries deposed or murdered at least several sultans, including Osman II in 1622, a killing so brazen and so public that it shocked even the jaded courts of Europe. Osman had tried to reduce Janissary power by rebuilding the military around Anatolian and Syrian troops. The Janissaries discovered the plan, revolted, captured the young sultan, and strangled him in prison. He was 19 years old. His sin had been imagining that he could diminish the very force that kept him on his throne. This is the paradox at the heart of Janissary history, and it's one that echoes through every era of human politics. The tool that wins you power becomes, if you're not careful, the tool that controls you. The weapon you forge can be turned around. The institution you build to serve the state can become the state itself. By the 18th century, the Janissaries had become, in military terms, a shadow of what they once were. They resisted modernization at every turn because modernization threatened their privileged status. When sultans attempted to introduce European-style drill, European weapons systems, or European military organization, the Janissaries revolted. They had a vested interest in keeping the army exactly as it was, because their political power derived from being indispensable in their current form. Actual military effectiveness had become secondary to institutional self-preservation. Janissary units that had once been the terror of Christendom now performed poorly against the reorganized armies of Austria and Russia. They were living off the reputation of ancestors who had been fundamentally different men living under fundamentally different conditions. And yet the myth was so powerful, so deeply embedded in Ottoman culture, that no sultan for nearly 2 centuries felt strong enough to dismantle the core entirely. Selim III tried at the end of the 18th century and paid for it with his throne and his life. The Janissaries revolted in 1807, deposed him, and installed a more pliable sultan in his place. The institution had, by this point, become less a military force and more a criminal political protection racket operating in plain sight at the heart of the empire. Then came Mahmud II, and everything changed. Mahmud had watched his predecessor's fate. He had spent years carefully, quietly, patiently building his power base outside the Janissary structure. He cultivated loyalty among other military units. He built relationships with the ulama, the Islamic religious establishment, whose support would be critical for what he was planning. He waited, and in June of 1826, he was ready. He announced the creation of a new, European-style military unit. He knew, as every sultan before him had known, what this would provoke. The Janissaries revolted exactly as predicted, overturning their soup cauldrons in the barracks, the ancient signal of defiance. But this time, Mahmud had prepared. Artillery units loyal to the Sultan surrounded the Janissary barracks in Istanbul. The religious establishment declared the revolt a sin against Islam, and Mahmud gave the order to fire. The barracks burned. Thousands of Janissaries died in the flames or were killed fleeing them. Thousands more were arrested, exiled, or executed in the weeks that followed. The corps was formally abolished. Its name was stripped from official records. Its symbols were destroyed. Mahmud called the event the Vakao-i-Hayrai, the Auspicious Incident. The institution that had defined the Ottoman military for nearly 5 centuries was gone in a single burning night. History tends to view the Auspicious Incident as a necessary act of modernization, and in narrow military terms, it was. The Janissaries had become an obstacle to the very survival of the empire they were supposed to defend. But it's worth pausing on what was also lost. The devshirme system, for all its brutality, had produced one of history's most remarkable experiments in meritocracy. Grand viziers who had been born Christian peasants, generals who had started life as the children of shepherds, men of extraordinary ability who had risen entirely on the basis of talent and discipline, in a world where birth determined almost everything. The system was cruel, deeply so, but it was also genuinely remarkable in what it could produce when it functioned as intended. The legacy of the Janissaries is not a simple one. They were victims who became victimizers. They were slaves who became kingmakers. They were forged in cruelty and capable of extraordinary discipline, extraordinary courage, and eventually extraordinary corruption. They remind us that no institution, however brilliantly designed, is immune to the slow gravity of self-interest. And they remind us of something darker still, that it is entirely possible to take a child, strip him of everything he is, replace it with something else entirely, and have him love you for it. Think about that the next time someone tells you that identity is something you're born with. The Janissaries spent 5 centuries proving that identity is something that can be built and destroyed and built again. The only question is who holds the tools.